Welcome to the Self-Storage University podcast, where you will learn the correct way to identify, evaluate, negotiate, perform due diligence on, renegotiate, finance, turn around, and operate self-storage facilities. And now, here is your host, a partner in one of the largest real estate portfolios in the U.S. with nearly $1 billion of holdings, Frank Rolfe.
When buying a self-storage facility, it's essential you always wear your white lab coat. You never get too optimistic on any deal because you have to look at the numbers fairly. You have to look at them from a third-party perspective, from an arm's length. You have to say to yourself, is this deal really going to work out for me? And one great way to do that is through stress testing. This is Frank Rolfe with the Self-Storage University podcast. We're going to talk about stress testing a deal, how it works, and then what you can tell from the results of the stress test of whether you want to buy that property or not. Now, why do we have to be negative on deals to begin with? It seems to be so much more fun to be endlessly positive. But the problem is that being positive, being an optimist, seldom relates to making money in real estate, because you miss the angle, the opposing view of what could go bad. So if you're buying a self-storage facility and you look at the numbers and you say, well, I can push this occupancy, I can push these rents, I can cut those costs. Well, perhaps you can, but on the corollary, perhaps you can't, because none of us really know how things work out. We always know there's that element of risk. If you look back at World War II, for example, Omar Bradley, the head of the Army, he once said, "No great plan survives first contact with the enemy." That means the Army could draw up all kinds of big plans for invasions and other things. But the very first time they hit the opposing force and they fired their artillery and they fought back, everything changed. Nothing worked the same. And even the invasion of Normandy by the United States, where we invaded France and we started to bring back the war, Eisenhower knew it's very possible it would fail. And he'd already written his speech admitting that it had failed and it was all his fault before they even landed or began the attack. And that's because we all should acknowledge we don't have full control over events. So knowing that, if you embrace that, then the first thing you have to ask yourself on any deal is, all right, not only what happens if things go well, but what about if things don't go well? What if things go bad? Some of us call this doing a best case, worst case, realistic case scenario. Best being that everything you hope for works out. Real, that halfway you get. But worst case, nothing good happens. You thought the occupancy would go up from 80 to 90%, but instead it stays flat at 80 or maybe even declines. You thought you'd raise the rates, but suddenly through a lot of vacancy, the rates decline. What happens to you? That's what modeling a worst case is. And for many bankers, they call this stress testing. Now, you've all seen the situation where the person, they probably are a little overweight. They put them on a treadmill with all these monitoring devices, and they push them as hard as they can to see where their body actually starts getting into danger. That's called stress testing. That's trying to figure out where your heart stands and your veins and everything in relation to day-to-day activities to know what's safe for you and if you need additional work to rehabilitate yourself so that you're healthier. The same is true of any self-storage facility. So how then do you stress test? Well, you simply take ratios and you push, for example, the occupancy down to see where you break. At what point can you have a decline in occupancy such that you can't pay the mortgage? Same with the rates. You can take any feature of that self-storage facility. You could say, well, what would happen if suddenly there's a problem with the roof or some other physical constraint? What's the negative impact from that? And that allows you to see just how much room you have for error. Now, a well-constructed deal is going to have a worst-case scenario that you can survive. But a poorly constructed deal will have a worst-case scenario where you lose the property, lose your down payment. Sam Zell was the number one investor in American history. He died a couple years ago, but he had been the largest owner of office buildings, apartment buildings, and mobile home parks in America. And he had a simple rule on life. He even told all of his employees, here's his simple 3-point theory. Number one, any deal that has low risk but high reward, you should always buy. Every deal that has high risk and low reward, you should never buy. And every deal that has high risk and high reward, those are the ones we should talk about. Clearly, when you're ascertaining risk ties back to stress testing. It ties back to worst case scenario. Not the scenario we all optimistically want to think about or ponder, but the reality that things don't always work out as you hoped. The bottom line is it's very, very smart for any investor to stress test their deal. There's many self-storage facilities right now in terrible economic trouble, particularly in a lot of large cities, many in the north, where people are fleeing from those cities, going to other markets where they feel are safer or that they feel has more economic vitality. And a lot of what happened to those self-storage facilities that are crashing in those markets is they did not do proper stress testing. They never thought what if on a bad side. They only thought about what if on the good side. For a smart investor, you've got to do both. You've got to always stress test, consider your worst case, and never buy anything if you can't survive it. This is Frank Rolfe, the Self-Storage University podcast. Hope you enjoyed this. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you for listening to the Self-Storage University podcast. Be sure to visit us at ssupodcast.com, where you can learn the correct way to identify, evaluate, negotiate, perform due diligence on, renegotiate, finance, turn around, and operate self-storage facilities.